Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our MPU. I will pause and give everyone about another 30 seconds to join us before we kick off.
Recording in progress.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our first monthly policy update of 2026. If you are new here, welcome to you. Independent Sector hosts this monthly series as an exclusive benefit for our members, where we share the latest policy developments and their implications for the charitable sector. Since we last met, one small but pretty big announcement was made that I want to make sure that you all are aware of. IS has announced the dates and location of our 2026 National Summit, which is Phoenix, Arizona, and it's going to be taking place from October 13th through the 16th. So if you have not already, please mark your calendars and save the date for our upcoming summit and plan to join us again this year. It was great seeing so many of you at last year's summit. We had a fantastic time and look forward to building on that for our 2026 summit. So with that, today's agenda will be pretty packed. We've got lots of things to cover. We'll start out with an overview of the federal policy landscape on Capitol Hill, specifically the latest on the federal budget process, where things stand on the eve of another government shutdown, the latest on the Affordable Care Act discussions in the Senate, timing for the State of the Union address, as well as the president's FY27 budget. So lots of things happening at the federal level that we want you all to be aware of. We'll be joined by Wes Coolum here in a few minutes, our partner over at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young, to provide these updates to you. Following Wes's segment, we'll be joined by our special guest today, who is Erin Melody, the Senior Legislative Assistant for Congresswoman Betty McCollum, who represents Minnesota's 4th District. Erin will be joining us to walk us through the process for submitting fiscal year 27 community project requests. While Congress is in the thick of FY26 budget negotiations, the process for getting fiscal year 27 requests has already begun, and we want to make sure you all have what you need to get those requests in for your members of Congress, understand best practices, and some of the things to highlight and to know about sending those requests. And then lastly, we'll be joined by my colleague Ben Kershaw, who will talk about independent sector's policy priorities for 2026 and what we'll be doing about them. So with all of that, one last housekeeping item before I turn it over to Wes here. Of course, as a part of our webinar format, all of your lines are muted, but don't let that discourage you from asking questions and joining the conversation. We will pause periodically for questions, so please feel free to use the questions box to drop your questions, and I'll be asking and answering them throughout today's webinar. So with that, I will turn things over to Wes for some legislative updates. Wes, could you give us the lay of the land on Capitol Hill as of Thursday at about 2:04 p.m.?
That's right. Thanks, Vanna. Yeah, happy to kind of get a little overview of kind of where things stand. We're in 2026. We're still dealing with holdover issues from 2025. We're still trying to finish up the appropriations process from last year that's still kind of ongoing in Congress. So as you recall, they didn't finish the appropriations process last year. We had a substantial 40 plus day shutdown. It ultimately passed three of the appropriations bills in December, and then recently three more this month. And then they're having six bills kind of yet to be finished and done. The House, before I left town last week, did pass a package of six appropriations bills, including the Homeland Security bill, Defense, Labor HHS, and others to finish up the process. However, events over the last several weeks and days have kind of changed the dynamics of that package, with the Homeland Security bill being a problem given the events in Minnesota. And right now, we're faced with the situation of what they do to get those bills done, or at least deal with the Homeland Security bill itself. Since the House passed that package as one bill and not six different bills, the Senate has to take them up as a package and cannot break them up individual pieces. For example, they cannot break the Homeland Security piece out separately without having to send it back to the House for further debate and vote. And as you know, the current CR expires as of midnight tomorrow night, January 30th. There was a vote in the Senate earlier today on a motion to proceed to that six-bill package from the House that failed to get the necessary votes to move forward. Eight Republicans voted with all the Democrats to oppose cloture to move forward on that six-bill package. The Democrats have said they're okay moving the five other bills and want to separate out or find some resolution on the Homeland Security bill, which, as you know, funds ICE activities. And that's the sticking point right now. There's been some conversations between the Democrats in the Senate and the administration on ways to break the impasse and get that package done. But it seems, as of now, looking at a possible government shutdown at least into next week until they can resolve these differences. A couple options on the table. Obviously, pass the six-bill package, which the Democrats are not going to do, and obviously the vote today with some Republicans also not supporting that plan is not going to proceed. They could repackage the bill and do the five appropriation bills that they agreed to and pass those, and leave Homeland Security bill alone and move that separately. That would still require the House to then take up that five-bill package next week and pass it. So it does not solve the issue of a possible shutdown this weekend. They could also pass a short-term CR to extend the government funding for another week or two, or give them some more time to negotiate these differences on this Homeland Security bill until they get the other bills passed as well. That also require the House, which is not in session this week and not coming back until next Monday, to come back and to pass that as well before the January 30th deadline. So kind of an impasse here on this issue. We'll see how it plays out the next 24 hours, but I think there is probably a good chance that they do have a short-term shutdown of the federal government unless they can find a way to pass a short-term CR for a couple days with the House coming back quickly to do that, or waiting until Monday to do it quickly as well. So we'll see how that plays out. I think that we're kind of looking towards a possible government shutdown for those six bills that haven't been enacted into law. Obviously, the other six are done, and therefore there's no implications or impacts on them because they've been funded through the end of the fiscal year of September 30th. So that's kind of, I think, where things are in the appropriations process, not where we thought we were going to be last week. That's kind of where they're looking at the moment on the budget and appropriations process. So with that, I think that's kind of the big issue that they have to deal with right now, and getting that resolved and done. I'm looking ahead, kind of beyond this year's appropriations process. Obviously, we're already into 2026. Usually kicking off the budget process for the new fiscal year is the president's budget. The president is set to have a State of the Union address to Congress on February 24th. Usually puts his budget out early in February, but I think that's going to be delayed given the timing of the State of the Union address is in late February. And then I would imagine they would have the budget process, documents submitted somewhere around that time frame, potentially after that or around the State of the Union address as well. And that will kick off, as you'll talk with Aaron later, about the FY27 appropriations process and have various hearings in the House and Senate appropriations committees on the various proposals and aspects of those issues. One thing that did not get done in the year-end conversation that's still outstanding is the number of tax extenders. The six-bill package that we talked about that's pending in the House, or passed the House and pending in the Senate, it has some healthcare extender items that need to be addressed, Medicare changes in doctors' fees, etc. They did not include any tax provisions or tax extenders as part of that appropriations bill that is pending in the Senate. For example, the work opportunity tax credit is one. that unfortunately has expired at the end of 2025 and did not get extended and has not yet been extended. And so efforts are underway to find a path for doing a tax package with some of those extended expiring provisions, including WOTC, as part of a further appropriation, a further package of bills, possibly a future appropriations bill, or possibly some other vehicle to do those as well, looking forward. One issue that's also of concern is the bill that is on the Senate floor includes funding for the IRS, and so if there's a government shutdown, the IRS funding would be impacted potentially, as we're in the middle of tax filing season. So that's one other consideration that is also at play there with that funding package. Happy to kind of pause there and open for any comments or questions from folks or Van or otherwise.
Great. Thank you so much, Wes, for that overview. I've got a couple questions here in the questions box that I'll ask. Besides the funding for ICE, are there any other points that are under discussion as we look at the negotiations that are happening in the Senate?
No, not really. It's really kind of focused around ICE. The Democrat leader in the Senate, Senator Schumer, kind of put out here's their top three priorities. Basically having to do with due process rights for entering people's homes without warrants. Cameras for ICE agents, those sort of things, kind of all around what we've seen happen in Minneapolis. And so I think that's kind of the focus right now, is finding a way to resolve those differences either through administrative means, like the Democrats want to have something more substantial in the form of legislative changes that Congress can pass into law rather than administrative promises.
Right. One more question here about ICE. This person is wanting to know, is during a shutdown, does ICE receive funding as a part of essential services?
Usually they do. They are essential, but also looking back at what happened last year in the Republican reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill, did include about $19 billion in extra funding for Homeland Security. And so this $10 billion in this current appropriations bill is, potentially there's a way for the Homeland Security to allocate funds they got last year on a mandatory basis to supplement some of their needs. So I don't think that if they didn't get funded and this appropriations bill didn't pass by the 30th, there was a shutdown. I don't think it would impact ICE's operations from that standpoint, because they have that mandatory funding that was given to them last year's Homeland Security mandatory appropriations bill last summer.
And Wes, just to confirm here on the WOTC bill, that is the WOTC would have to pass in a separate bill as opposed to any of these stalled appropriation bills, or is it in one of those bills?
It's not included in one of those bills that is pending in the Senate. So it obviously has been introduced in the House and Senate on a bipartisan basis. Congressman Smucker and Horsford in the House and Senator Cassie and Hassan in the Senate. But that bill would have to either move by itself or part of a bigger tax package. And there's no tax extenders or tax provisions in the current appropriations bill that's pending in the Senate that passed the House.
Great. And one more question here on federal staffing. What's your sense of a Doge style federal staffing and funding cut going forward? Any sense there or
Yeah,
any
so
thoughts there?
from folks to make sure they pass the appropriation bills on time and get them done to law. It's going to gives the ability to Congress to kind of put some details around what those funding money can be used for, and some kind of guardrails around what the administration can and can't use that funding for. If they don't have that, the administration has a little more flexibility in what they can spend the money on or cuts they can make. So there are some provisions in this appropriations bill that does tighten up some of those rules, but the administration still has pretty broad flexibility to deal with spending cuts and personnel matters in the various agencies. Obviously, there's lawsuits going on and some of that, some of those activities, but for the most part, they have the ability to reallocate funds and staffing in the various agencies going forward.
Thanks, Wes. I'm going to pause just to see if there are other questions. Great questions coming through, by the way. And I know there was one on the probability of a shutdown. I know that you addressed that one earlier, Wes, and saying that there is pretty strong possibility at this point of a partial shutdown. So um, thank you for that. All righty. Seeing no other questions, Wes, thanks so much as always for joining us for this update. Always helpful and planning out the weeks ahead in our advocacy efforts. I know you're going to stick around just in case any lingering questions come up about some federal policies here in the next few minutes. So appreciate it
Yep.
as always.
Thanks.
Thank you. And so at this point, I will shift gears a bit and bring our guest speaker on. Erin Melody, again, is the Senior Legislative Assistant for Congresswoman Betty McCollum's office. Congresswoman McCollum represents Minnesota's 4th District, and Erin will be joining us today to talk through the process of submitting community project funding requests, how to do those, what are some things to look out for, how to build relationships with your legislators throughout that process. So Erin, welcome and thanks again for joining us. I know as Wes kind of walked us through, there is a lot going on Capitol Hill these days, so appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Um, Before I jump into I'm going to ask the first question, but before you answer it, if you'll just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role. But the first question that I'll ask you is, what are community project funding requests, excuse me, and why should nonprofits see them as meaningful advocacy opportunities? So welcome again, Erin, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, it's good to be here with you all. So I'm a legislative assistant for the Congresswoman. So one of my roles is to kind of go through these requests, the ones that we get from organizations, municipalities back in the district, and to vet them, brief them to the Congresswoman. So I've seen a lot of projects the last couple of years and can kind of speak to some of the good aspects about some of the pitfalls as well. So, but community project funding requests, they're also known as CPFs. They're an opportunity for members of Congress to direct funding back to their district for a specific project. They've been back in Congress since 2021. And CPFs are the House name. The Senate has another name for the exact same thing. So that's Congressionally Directed Spending, or CDS. So here it's called two different things, but they're both the same names for rebranded earmarks. So there's some more reporting requirements, things like that have been changed since the last time that they were available in the 2010s. So they're a great opportunity for nonprofits. I know from our local folks that I've met with, your budgets are kind of hamstrung at the moment. You're facing pressure from all different sides, and this is a good way to direct some funding to get a project over the finish line, especially some like capital improvement projects that's been really successful in the past for our local nonprofits. So I can speak more to the House process of that, as that is my experience. But members of the House usually have 15 projects that they can submit. We are given guidance from the Appropriations Committee. As staff, it lays out what accounts are eligible and the requirements in order to submit into a certain account. So some of the popular projects are kind of hard infrastructure, roads, bridges, harbors, things like that. Public safety, some different things for police departments. And then something that's been very successful for nonprofits is the construction and renovation of buildings, so some capital improvements. That is funded out of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And as of FY25, so a couple of years ago, Republicans in the House made this account ineligible for nonprofits. So nonprofits had to go to the Senate instead to pursue this funding. And I'm not sure that will change. I don't think that will change for FY27, just as there's been no change in majority or leadership of the committee. So that's a little unfortunate. In contrast to the House, the Senate does not have a cap on total projects, is my understanding. They have a much wider availability of accounts that they can request out of as well, including eligibility for nonprofits throughout a couple different ones. So it's kind of a little overview.
Great. That was a great overview, especially laying out the types of projects that are most common when submitting these proposals. Erin, from your perspective, what makes a CPF funding request stand out as strong? What are some of the things that you all look for when these requests come in?
Yeah, so I'll kind of give an example of a good project that came in And we were able to fund a couple years ago for a nonprofit. So we had received outreach and a request from a local Boys and Girls Club in the district. They requested an earmark CPF for the rehabilitation of their facility to build on a new area for a workforce training center for youth in the neighborhood. That Boys and Girls Club serves the most diverse and youngest population in our district, and would really give those youths a good opportunity, a good place to be. So, what stood out about their project to us, the idea was fully fleshed out when it came to us, and we're happy to do some brainstorming things, but that's not going to so much help for this exact year that you're requesting within. It can be good for more long-term planning, starting relationships. But when they came to us, they had an idea. They had some ideas of architectural plans, how it was going to work out, stuff like that. So it was very good. The project fit well within the eligibility requirements of the accounts that we had available to us. And that year that they submitted, this was FY24, the committee had asked that we kind of help to fund workforce training elements in our projects, especially within this account. That's what they were looking for, and they fit really well within what the committee wanted to fund, what the majority wanted to fund. We knew exactly who this would help, this project. We knew why we should care. That was laid out in their application. Again, the nonprofit, so one of the important parts in the vetting process and by the staff, congressional staff and the committee, is that they need to have community support. So it can't just be the nonprofit. It has to be some other aspect of people who are going to be benefiting. And so we got some letters of support from local elected officials, which kind of shows us that should federal funding fall short, that maybe some state and local funds could be pursued, that someone is interested in doing that. We also had support from businesses who were saying, we would love this workforce training center. It would help, these be able to see different career pathways, kind of help us to teach them what it would be like to work for us one day as well. So that was great, especially this is under Republican majority. They were, a business aspect is going to be great as well there too. So the other thing is that House offices in our applications, I'm not sure if the Senate changed this as well, but we have to have a specific letter that justifies why this is a good use of taxpayer funds. And that was really well laid out within their application. We totally saw the need there and why we should direct these funds there. And lastly, this nonprofit was on our radar before they applied. So the member herself was aware of the Boys and Girls Club. Their staff had been in regular contact with us for local events like National Night Out, some different things. People had been to the facility, and emailing us a request was not out of the ordinary. So that was great.
And Aaron, I have a brief follow-up to when you talk about community support from local elected officials, is it best to include letters of support from those individuals with your request?
Yes. Or if you don't have them on time, let us know who will be submitting one. Sometimes an organization will submit a request and we'll have to follow up and say, hey, we're not seeing any letters of support. Do you have any in the works? And even just, on the application saying, we don't have them quite finalized, but the city council or a county commissioner or a business will be sending one along very soon. Something like that is helpful.
Great, thank you. A follow-up, we know some of the things that work well in these funding requests. Let's talk about the flip side of that. What are some common mistakes that nonprofits make when submitting these requests, and how can they avoid them?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see is not having the office prepped on your request, not having that existing relationship before you're asking for this funding. So, if I'm aware of the project, I'm always happy to meet with organizations, municipalities, whoever, to talk about a project at any point throughout the year. And if I've met with the group, if I know what the project is about, then I can easily brief my boss. We've been given the last couple of years really short turnarounds. The committee gives us guidance, and maybe a month later, we have to submit it to the committee. So then we have to adjust our internal deadlines to, reach out to folks in the community and say, you need to quickly send us all this information. So it becomes a time crunch. If you have these conversations earlier, it kind of helps the staff deal with all of this, because we're looking through, like personally, I'm looking through 30 or 40 projects and trying to remember the minutia of each one and brief my boss correctly on all of them. So, talking through why this is needed earlier than that is always great. What else? I think the other mistake is some places, some nonprofits or municipalities will submit a request and they won't ask for a postmortem after if they are rejected. I think asking for, hey, our project did not get funded. Could you give us a little bit more insight into why and how to be a better applicant next year? So for nonprofits not being eligible in the Senate as well, we always direct them to our senators as quickly as we possibly can these last 2 years since that, or last 2 years since that has taken effect. So, starting those relationships and stuff like that can be helpful for you all.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, along the theme of relationships, talking about you all passing requests over to the Senate, thinking about the relationships between nonprofits and their legislative office, just how should folks on the today's webinar be thinking about these relationships before these requests are submitted, while they're being reviewed, and then after these requests have been submitted?
I think, a good way to get kind of the ear of a congressional office is their local district office, or for senators, their state office. There's staff there, and their job is to stay up to date and in tune with what's going on in the community. Reaching out or offering a site visit to staff, offering a virtual meeting as a backup to talk about the problems that your nonprofit is facing, that you're interested or pursuing community project funding, or you're interested in it and you don't know much about the process. Starting the conversation is good because they can give you some insight and advice into their internal process, what kind of projects their boss likes to fund with this process, because everyone is different. And then they can also give you more insight into the Senate process as well that I can't speak too much to. But letting them know, kind of, showing them the nonprofit or letting them know what you all are doing and what your needs are, I think is a good way to start. And on that, one other thing, just as a little recommendation, I would focus, you have limited time and resources, so I would focus your energy on Senate offices first. Talk to them, since nonprofits are likely to still be eligible there. Talk to them, see what they're thinking for FY27. And then you can also apply to House offices, even knowing that, you are ineligible for some of this funding. But letting them know is a good thing as well. Like we've provided some letters of support for nonprofits who applied to our office. We are not able to help, but our senators are looking at those projects. And so we were able to send the Senate some letters of support to try to, help this project get funded, because it is still needed, even though we can't. Our hands are a little bit tied. So.
Thanks, Aaron. That was all of the questions that I have. I'm going to turn it over to see if folks in the audience have questions for you. I know that this was a topic of interest to many of our members, and so I want to take a moment to ask a few questions here. I see one from Kay that I'll ask here. I know you covered a lot, and I'm just going to ask it. I know you covered a lot in terms of, making a request stand out, but I'll just ask this in case you have any other thoughts. The question was, is there a way for projects from nonprofits to be competitive? And this person is saying that they found that most of the requests go to a local governmental agency, and just wanting to know if you have additional thoughts on making nonprofit requests be more competitive on the federal level.
Yeah, so it's definitely shifted. All of our CPFs are now going to local government entities, unfortunately. So I think a good way to do this is to let them know the population that the nonprofit is serving, that you can reach, X amount of people that is going to help this certain, amount of their constituency. I think that is a really good way, and showing them, if it's a facility, because these capital improvement projects have been really successful in the past. showing them the area, seeing, okay, we've outgrown this space. We need help in order to continue to serve the community. And you and I can both see that this space is not what it should be. And so kind of showing them that the need is really there, and asking them, kind of forthright what they want to fund, what their boss wants to fund, can kind of help to determine, and not have you, waste a little bit too much of your time and resources.
Thank you for that. And I have another question too, and others feel free to ask questions in the chat, Aaron. I realize we didn't talk about general timeline. We know that that the time is now to submit these requests,
We did it.
and you can talk about the Congresswoman's timeline. I know they differ from office to office,
Yeah.
but general timeline and just general process for hearing back and those types of things.
Yeah. So Wes was kind of talking about the president's budget as kind of a starting off point for the appropriations process in the House. And every office up here is a little bit different. So I can kind of generalize some of it and talk more about our process, but I would start having those conversations now. I would reach out to, your senators and members of Congress in the next week or 2 weeks here to kind of say, I'd like to have a virtual meeting, or I'd like to invite you to my site, even your staff, just to start the conversation. Because we could get guidance from the committee like any day or week now. I'm not hearing rumors about that, but it would be, these conversations are good to have in February and early March. We could get deadlines from the committee in March or April. And so at some point in the spring, we'll have to submit community project funding. The bills will then be written. The projects will be included, and they'll be released late spring to early summer. The bills would be marked up on the House side in committee in June and July usually. They'll head to the Senate. The Senate is usually a little bit delayed from that, but they also would probably release those community project funding tables where the results are over the summer. They need to pass by the September 30th deadline at the end of the fiscal year. They usually don't, and so we end up in this kind of rolling process, like Wes was explaining. So a good portion of our community projects from FY26 are in the Senate right now. They're waiting to be voted on in the transportation housing bill, and so they're still kind of, they're part of this ongoing process. So it's kind of a yearly thing, but the intensive part happens right now when you're talking about ideas, submitting those ideas to an office and seeing if that takes.
Thanks, Aaron. Final pause here to see if others have questions for you before we sign off here. I really appreciate the guidance. This has been helpful for even myself, who's been in advocacy for quite a while now.
And I'll just say one thing too, our office is happy to talk to any of our constituents, any nonprofits, organizations in the district. I think our senators would be the same. I would just start by, calling up the office if you don't have a contact and saying, I'd like to, speak with someone, some community engagement person at your district office, or someone on your legislative team to talk about pursuing community project funding, and they should be open.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Well, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon, taking some time to be with us. Thanks so much. We will be in contact following up with you after the webinar, but we appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Thank you. And so at this time, I will turn it over to my colleague Ben to start to talk about our our 2026 policy priorities here at IS. Ben, I will just turn it over to you to begin to walk us through what we're going to be prioritizing for this year in terms of federal policy. So, Ben.
Thank you, Vanna. And I'm really glad, although intimidated to follow Wes and Aaron. Glad I'm not having to talk about appropriation stuff. I mean, as I think was also, Aaron may have been slightly modest but the fact that her boss is also a really senior member of the appropriations committee And so their staff is, as I think we all saw, really, really savvy on these things. So I'm learning a lot too. Really, really valuable. As we look towards 2026 and our policy priorities, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about areas that independent sectors, government relations, and advocacy activities hope to focus this year. And we think about the things that are on this list through, I would say two key lenses. And that is their potential to have a big impact on the sector and their potential to be part of the legislative process or at least part of the legislative conversation this year. So some of these things are kind of more live than others, and some are a bigger deal if they happen than others. But just a long-winded way of saying that we try to focus on things that could happen and would have a big impact. So the first priority I want to highlight right now is advocating for policies that support the nonprofit workforce. This includes both basic data about the nonprofit workforce, the same data that for-profit businesses get for free from the government every quarter, but it also includes actual workforce benefits like retirement plans or paid family leave, hiring incentives like WOTC was discussed earlier. So there are a number of employer tax credits that leave out nonprofits simply because those tax credits were designed only with the income tax in mind and not the considerable other taxes that nonprofits pay. So that's the concept in its broadest terms. And then there's actual concrete legislation that would fix one of these problems. The Small Nonprofit Retirement Security Act would allow small nonprofits in the same way that small businesses can claim a credit when they start a retirement plan for their employees. There are administrative costs of that. There's a credit for auto enrollment and matching that this bill would allow nonprofits to claim exactly the same way that small businesses get to claim it currently. So that's one specific example of that first kind of broader focus on policies that support the nonprofit workforce. The second area that I want to talk about is that we're closely watching how last year's tax and budget legislation will impact charitable giving this year. And this is an area that independent sectors always worked on, but this year's honestly a little unique for us because so much changed last year. So the bill that was enacted last summer contained four significant policy changes around charitable giving. And unless anyone really wants me to, I won't get deep into the weeds on these, but it contained a new capped charitable deduction for non-itemizers. It contained a new floor for people who do itemize and claim the charitable deduction. It contained an overall limit on the value of all itemized deductions, including the charitable deduction, for high income taxpayers. And then it included a new floor on charitable deductions for corporations as well. Um, of all of those four, one that we see as really the potential to at least build support this year for partial or full relief in the future is around the corporate floor. So that's an area where we are eager to have conversations with policymakers and other partners to try to build some momentum there around fixing a policy that our economic modeling research shows will eliminate $4.5 billion in charitable giving each year. Um, the third item, and I'm going to keep running through these and then happy to pause for questions. The third item that is going to continue to be a focus of ours is protecting the independence of nonprofit organizations by upholding the Johnson Amendment, which is that firewall between partisan politics, endorsing or opposing candidates for public office, and charity. It's part of the definition of what it means to be a 501(c)(3), and it has been for over 70 years. So that's one area where we will continue to focus, both watching the courts and watching whether there's need to intervene in the courts, as well as legislatively. And then the fourth area that we see as a critical focus this year is that nonprofit organizations have federal oversight under the law. They're subject to scrutiny from the IRS to make sure they live up to their tax exempt purpose. And if they're not living up to that purpose, the law provides that they could lose that status. Um, Strikingly, though, the process for potentially examining and reviewing and ultimately revoking that status only lives in regulations, and much of it does not live in law. So that means that any administration, whether it's held by a Republican or a Democrat, could choose to change a lot of the protections that nonprofit organizations have enjoyed for decades around due process and protecting their status. So we are interested in talking with legislators and advocates about trying to enshrine into law some of those longstanding protections that have otherwise lived in regulations. So that's a fourth core area of focus for our policy work this year. Why don't I stop there, Vanna?
Great, because I do have a follow-up question for you on the nonprofit retirement credit. Um, is that credit retroactive? And then how long will those credits last? For example, can a nonprofit claim the credit year over year, or is it a one-time thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the credit is not retroactive, so it's a credit for starting a plan. But the you can claim the credit on the administrative costs for the first 3 years of starting a plan. So it's a credit of up to $5,000 per year on that piece of the credit. And then there's an additional $500 bonus if you have an auto enrollment feature, and then there's an additional portion of your employee match that you can claim a credit to offset as well. It's not retroactive.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions about our priorities for the year from the audience? I'm going to shift gears in a second to talk a little bit about IS's approach, what we'll be doing in 2026, but I want to pause to get questions about the specific policies. Okay, seeing none. Oh, there we go. Well, that was, I think, part of where we were going in the next section is what we're doing. But to that, Ben, do we have any sponsors identified yet for possible legislation?
If this is the I won't call out people by name. I'm not sure if they want their names noted publicly. The retirement credit legislation does have really strong bipartisan sponsors right now. Senator Lankford and Senator Cortez Masto in the Senate, and Congressman Buchanan, Panetta, Schneider, and Blake Moore in the House. Really strong bipartisan set of tax members. Um, for the other credits, we have targets and folks that we've talked to who are interested, but we don't have people who've put their names forward and claimed those tax credits. So I would love to stay in touch with you if you have ideas. Particularly, there are, again, the person who asked this question has their organization's been really helpful in trying to find some good sponsors. So I encourage you all to be like that person and be in touch.
Thanks, Ben. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about IS's approach this year, and a little bit to the question of sponsors. You know, what could potentially move to your 2 points earlier, those two things making a big impact, and then being a part of the legislative conversation. So talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing.
So, I mean, I think there's the various kind of four planks that I laid out are at various levels of ripeness for advocacy. So, the introduced bill, we are not at a point where it is gonna get signed into law tomorrow or considered by a committee tomorrow, which is a good thing. We have a chance to build up the co-sponsor list on that legislation um, right now, and honestly, for for a few months at least. So that's hard work in the trenches, and the easiest thing that y'all can do to help build support for that is to send the action alert that's in the IS Action Center and ask your legislators to co-sponsor. And then I would say even more importantly, share that or some version of it with your own branding with your networks. So that's where that one is. And then, you know, I think the other ones are somewhere in between around, this sort of bigger picture idea of protecting and enshrining in law the independence of the nonprofit sector. One great way for people to get involved in that work would be to join us at Foundations on the Hill in March to advance that conversation. March 16th through 19th in DC, a chance to dig in more on the policy and then share that message with your legislators about the importance of philanthropy and our sector and protecting our sector.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for the plug on Foundations on the Hill. I was going to give that in a few minutes. To Ben's point about the retirement credit bill, yes, we currently have an action alert live in our online action center, but I would encourage folks, if you are not already in our online action center, to sign up for that. As things move, as we get closer to co-sponsorships, as co-sponsors or as sponsors come about, and we attempt to drum up additional sponsors, we will be sending out action alerts and opportunities for people to engage either through quick emails, making phone calls to legislators. So please, if you're not already, join our online action center. We'll include the link to do so in follow-up materials, but I did want to make sure you all knew that that was live and available to you for use. Any other questions for Ben about our 2026 policy priorities? Would love to hear from folks on alignment with your own priorities and just other general questions that you have as we are at the top of the year and getting ready for a very long and potentially very active next few months. So I'll give it another pause here to see what you all have. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Ben, for dropping that link to our quorum campaign in the chat. Like I said, we'll also include that in any follow-up materials for you all. Please take action, share it with your networks as additional things come up throughout the year. We will be sharing action alerts and easy ways for you all to get involved. As Ben said earlier, to the anonymous comment and the question in the questions box, folks on the call, please be more like anonymous. If there are opportunities, if you know of legislators who are potential co-sponsors for bills that we are trying to get some movement on, please reach out to our policy team and talk through it. I have another question here for you, Ben, before I move us along. Will the agenda be posted on our website?
A lot of these priorities live on our website in various forms.
Mhm.
I'm not sure whether this will be, you know, I think it's a good idea. So, yeah, thanks for the homework. I think it will be. Probably be a blog post, pulling together some of these various resources.
Yes, thank you. And to the person who asked, also be aware that we also put out our DC download with a rundown of all of our policy priorities, how they're moving on Capitol Hill. So make sure you all see that in our Voices for Good and our digest and all of our newsletters that go out. So It is posted in and also our online tracker as well with our policies that are moving online. Ben, any final thoughts before I move us along on our policy priorities?
Just that when I um for a long time, the surest way to ensure that there was breaking news on Capitol Hill was to schedule an independent sector monthly policy update. And I'm just thrilled that Vanna seems to have brought and probably even amplified that penchant for action that holding this policy update can create on the Hill. So I'm excited about that.
I appreciate that, Ben. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And I have a couple of final announcements before we sign off here. And as I'm speaking these announcements, I'll also be looking for any final questions that you all might have for either Ben or Wes. But as Ben mentioned, one of the ways that you can advocate for the policies that we've mentioned, specifically around sector protections, is by attending Foundations on the Hill 2026. It's going to be taking place from March 16th through the 19th. A registration link should be shared in the chat. We'll also share that out with our follow-up materials. But the event's hosted by United Philanthropy Forum in partnership with both Independent Sector and Council on Foundations. It is a 4-day event. So there will be some programming, some conference style programming, followed by actual visits to Capitol Hill to meet with legislators to push some of the some of the pieces of legislation that Ben talked about today and other legislation that would impact foundations. So please register for Foundations on the Hill if you are not already registered. Share it with your networks, people who may be interested in joining. It's a great event, and we look forward to co-hosting it. And lastly, please come back in February to join us for our next monthly policy update. It will take place on February 26th at 2 p.m. So we hope to see you all there. And before we sign off, I'll pause one more time to see if there are any questions, final questions before we sign off here. All right, seeing nothing, I want to thank Wes, as always, for joining us and providing very helpful updates, very thorough updates for what's happening on Capitol Hill. I also want to thank Erin Melody again for taking time out of her day to join us to talk through CPF requests, the process for that. And then, as always, thanks, Ben, for going over independent sector's priorities for 2026. Always helpful to know what we will be focused on and how folks can get engaged. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you again in February. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.